Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Deathleaper, Terror Weapon, a Haste Gruul deck. This deck comes to us from Sao, who says, hello, first of all I like your videos. Thank you Sao, I appreciate that. Regarding this deck, I have created numerous versions and I can't seem to stick with any of them. I think it has trouble keeping opponents at bay in the early turns, that's 4 to 5. I feel like if I go last in the turn order, I am at the mercy of my opponents not killing me. Once I have a draw ramp engine established, the deck works very well, but until then, it has a hard time competing with more explosive decks, such as Ivy, Voja, Zephyrus, etc. Absolutely, we'll take a look. In terms of budget, there's no budget whatsoever, though I will say, with a Haste deck and a kind of ETB Haste deck, as Deathleaper is, there are a lot of suggestions I could just throw in, especially for increasing the power level, such as Ragavan, such as Dockside Extortionist. I don't tend to suggest those cards because they are very expensive and very polarizing, but I thought right now I'd just throw them out anyways. That being said, I'm excited to take a look at this deck. I think Deathleaper is very cool, and you can't get away from these Universe Beyond commanders, but I do think the Tyranids are really, really cool. They remind me of the Necromorphs from Dead Space, if anyone's familiar. Really, really cool cards, except for these are in Naya, I believe, or Temur, right? Red, green, yeah, they're in Temur colors, whereas I always think the Necromorphs are in Golgari green-black colors. Anyways, all that aside, let's get right into it and see what we can do to improve the deck. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Deathleaper, Terror Weapon, and why are they our commander for our red-green Haste deck? Deathleaper is a 3/3 flash haste creature for 4 mana in red-green. They are a Tyranid, and they have one main ability that is rather cool with a grim name, Flesh Hooks. Creatures that you control have entered the battlefield this turn have double strike. Now, Flesh Hooks are generally about keeping something immobilized. I think of insects with hooks. It keeps something immobilized. I don't know what that has to do with entering the battlefield that turn. That being said, it's really cool and very interesting as a haste-based deck to make all of your hasted creatures basically hit twice, which is very strong. The flash on this card always kind of catches my eye because I think it enables it to be a defensive cast as well. You cast Deathleaper in at flash speed block, and you do immediately 3 damage with first strike and then another 3. However, I feel like the purpose of the deck seems really secondary. Like this kind of technique seems secondary to the main purpose, where it's just go hard, go fast, and smash face. So the flash is always something that I thought was kind of interesting, and I would have traded this flash for like an additional toughness any day of the week. Hell, an additional power as well. Looking at the deck itself, there's a lot of this I really do like, but I can kind of see the elements that the deck is having a struggle winning. Right now, as Sao puts it, if the deck gets how do I put this? If the deck gets left alone, it's going to win the game. And I think that's kind of funny. That's something like I feel like a lot of commander decks have that feeling. I have tons of decks that if you leave alone, I'll win the game. And I think a lot of people would agree that their decks would be considered much stronger than they are if they were left alone. If I gave you an emblem at the start of the game that says you and your creatures have hexproof or even indestructible, yeah, your deck would be considerably more powerful. So looking at decks that are trying to fight through removal, fight through interaction, stopping their opponents, it gets a little trickier because everything is a little weaker. But for me, I think the biggest notable difference is this area right here. If we look at the mana curve, we can see it's really kind of a big turtle shell here, kind of going up to 3 and 4, especially 4 being rather crowded for a deck that has a very important 4 mana commander. If you've seen my videos before, it's something I do talk about a lot, where you don't want, if your commander is kind of essential to the deck, but not necessarily to the point that the deck just can't run without it, so you'll always cast your commander first, it becomes clunky to have cards at the same mana value, right? So things like Questing Beast or a better example would be Toski. Toski is a very strong card, and there's going to be certain boards that you're going to want to cast Toski before Deathleaper. And them being the same mana cost makes it a bit clunky, because on the next turn, you'll have 5 mana ideally, but you'll still want to cast one of these 4-drops, which will make it even harder to cast other spells. So generally we try to lower the curve around that number to make it easier. But generally, we can see from anywhere from 3 onwards. Let's see, let's do quick maths here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So just over a third of our creatures are 3 mana or less, which means almost 2/3, yeah, just under 2/3 are 4 mana and higher, which I think is kind of a problem. I think if we removed all of the 1 to 2 mana spells, or even 1 to 3 mana spells that aren't creatures from the deck, it would be dramatic how much of our deck is high mana creatures. And I would say that is something that is making your deck kind of anemic at the start, is that, you know, you don't really have a lot to do. Now, there's a lot of solutions to this. Namely, we can go harder and harder into ramp. We can notice that we have 6 creatures that are 2 mana or less. And like I said, the easiest solution is to take, can I highlight you? There you go. Is to take these. That's funny too. Of the 6 creatures, all but 1 is oriented towards ramp, and 1 of them sacrifices themselves for that ramp. So it is unsurprising that you don't have a lot of early board or early presence, especially with the other ramp cards being 2 mana and sorcery speed. Sorry, sorceries themselves. With our DAWs, the only card at that power level that actually does anything towards your game plan. Now, I could probably devote the entire video on like suggestions of hasty 1 to 2 mana creatures. I've only put like 1 in the side because I kind of want to focus on the top end first, and then later we can go back and do the early end, or the beginning of the game. I think like a general thing I could say is you could be playing more mana dorks. All of these creatures could be mana dorks. And a few other cuts could also be mana dorks, which make it easier for you to get off the ground. Considering the number of 3-drops and 1 mana creatures would allow these 3-drops to come into play immediately. So that's something I don't want to touch too much on, but something I want you to take in mind. Another thing, briefly, we are at 35 lands. I wouldn't mind 1 to 2 more lands. I think 1 would be enough, 36 with 37 MDFC, especially if you're going to follow my guideline and cut some high mana stuff, which is what we will get to now. Let's take a look at your higher mana stuff, and let's see how much of it I would agree with keeping. Now, Archwing Dragon is just a really good card to start with because I think it exemplifies the problem in a deck like this when we're trying to gear it towards stronger play groups and increase the strength and power of the deck. So Archwing Dragon is a flying haste 4/4 that on the end step return Archwing Dragon to its owner's hand. It creates, with our commander out, 8 damage to a player, assuming no one has evasion or removal towards it or our commander. The cost for this is to have a creature that is constantly requiring to be recast. It is 4 mana a turn to deal 8 damage to one of your opponents if your commander is out. Now, in very low to the ground, in lower power pods, I would say things that are like 5s and below, this is a pretty good plan. I think if your opponents are all playing kind of battle cruiser, everyone's kind of doing their own thing, smashing in the air for 8 a turn is very respectable. However, as the power goes up, this becomes considerably less impressive. And the main thing I want to do is I want to give you better finishers, which is, we'll get to that in additions, but I want this card to not be the benchmark of power for the latter half of your deck. This shouldn't be the card that you look to and go, oh wow, this is a lot of damage and a lot of advantage across the board, because frankly, it really isn't. So these are the kind of cards we'd like to cut. So Archwing Dragon, I'd like to cut. Beast Whisperer, I think this is not the deck for Beast Whisperer. I understand that Beast Whisperer is one of those cards that players just kind of see as a staple. You're in green. Likewise over here, Guardian Project, which, to be honest, I'd probably cut as well, especially since Beast Whisperer like feels really good with a card like Archwing Dragon, where now for 4 mana you are getting 8 damage in and drawing a card, once again if your commander's in play. But I don't think that's the purpose of the deck. The purpose of the deck is not on cast. I would say at least Guardian projects on ETB. That being said, it's non-token and it doesn't have the same name, which means it just fundamentally does not work with half of our strong top end like Kiki Jiki and other clone or Splinter Twin effects. So, though I wanted to just start with cutting Beast Whisperer, I'm just gonna slide over here and say, let's cut Guardian project too. And you might be like, well, what about card advantage? And I would say cards like, oops, not Sereth, Totsky are definitely more of the direction that you want. The every time you deal combat damage trigger is already very, very good. It's on a very good creature, and Double Strike works exceedingly well with these kind of creatures, doubling your draw. So Totsky is the 4 mana card you want, not Beast Whisperer. Beast Whisperer is probably one of the reasons that you're having a clunky time keeping up with the other decks, because let's imagine a scenario: you start the game, you play a land, you don't have anything to cast, next turn you play ramp, turn 3 you play Beast Whisperer. That's a pretty slow start. You are showing to your opponents that you're slowly going to put, a board together and get some, some advantage. But what is that advantage? There's 2 ways this ends. The simple way is that it just gets bolted. Beast Whisperer is not like Smothering Tide. It's a lot harder to deal with an enchantment than it is to cast a lightning bolt at Beast Whisperer. So there's a chance that your 4 mana card gets completely countered by a 1 mana card, not including things like Path to Exile, Source of Plowshares. Any form of removal is just creature removal, I should say, is very good at taking care of Beast Whisperer. But even if you have Beast Whisperer, what are you casting? The majority of your cards are not low mana, they're actually high mana. So the next cast you do, which could be like Glorybringer, all of a sudden just really isn't that much. You've just drawn a card and cast a Glorybringer, you're not taking advantage of it. Even with all the ramp in the world, the cost of your cards is too high. The best thing you could do is string Elvish Mystic, Finehorn Elves, and Llanowar Elves in a row and draw 3 cards for 3 mana, but those are the only 1 mana creatures. And for that reason, Beast Whisperer, I think, is a very easy cut. Elturel Survivals, I really like. I like these Myriad cards. I wish we had more haste enablers. Once again, something I didn't put into additions, because I don't know to what degree I really want it, but something like Lightning Greaves would probably be very good. But this card itself, I think, is rather good, and has a really interesting interaction with Myriad, and has a nice amount of toughness that I particularly like. So this is fantastic. Impetuous Devils. Do you remember the card we just talked about a little while ago, which is Archwing Dragon? I'm going to make these ones shorter because you've already heard the spiel, but Impetuous Devils is kind of worse because it dies on combat. Now, don't get me wrong, like, there are situations that I think this could be a cool card, but you have to be really lucky for this to get in, and this ability to stop, to pick a target to block it has to matter, because it doesn't always matter. Like, we can say, oh cool, we'll get their commander, but that's not always going to happen. And even then, first strike, any form of removal, a stiff breeze honestly kills this creature, and at least the first strike is somewhat negated by your commander, but overall this is just not a card I'm particularly impressed with. You might say that, hey, it's just removal, like, why don't you take it that way? I don't think we should be playing 4 mana removal that requires combat in order to be good. And though the ceiling with Double Strike is high, it's still not that high. You attack me and I've got what, like, looking around at my commanders, I've got a 3/3 commander. You're gonna do, with Double Strike, if your commander's out, you're gonna do 9 damage to me. That's not bad, but considering the Double Strike clause, you could be doing way more damage. And otherwise, if you don't have it, you're only doing 3 damage, assuming my commander can't interact. I don't know. It's too many hoops. I promise this one would be shorter than the last one. No, I wouldn't play this. This is a very poor use of everything that makes your deck work, I would say. Naiath, I think this is much more interesting. I think the double target creature's power is great. I also like the must block, works better. I wish we had more ways to give trample, but I think this is really, really cool. With trample, this is a particularly good ability. Notice the difference between these two cards. I'm going back to Impetuous Devils. Notice that Impetuous Devils is a one-off use that can get you card parity by trading that card for one of your opponent's creatures if that creature is worth for you to force to block, not including the fact that, you know, your opponent could block with other things if they so chose. Whereas this commander or this legendary creature is not only just neutrally very, very good in a deck like this, it also by itself does everything the other card does. For 3 extra mana, you can repeatedly grow your creatures and force blocks to your heart's content, drawing extra cards. That is the level of power difference I'd like to point out. Questing Beast, I think, is fine. I'm generally less impressed by it in Commander, but that first hit being 8 damage isn't bad. It is surprisingly able to punch through tokens and stuff like that, and the combat damage not being prevented can be very, very relevant against fogs or One Ring, which I like. That second line of text, that last line of text about Planeswalkers, ignore it. It's never going to come up. Sereth, the Viper's Fang. I don't like this card. This is a very, very bad card, and even with the synergy, I don't like it. If this was Trample, I would be very excited, but as Death Touch, I don't think it's very relevant. I get the win more aspect that with your commander out and with a hasty creature, and with this, it hits for Death Touch right away, but that's a lot of ifs, and it's just not particularly good in the meantime. It gives things hexproof, which I like, untapped things, but you are turning your creature sideways, and it itself does not have hexproof, which means it's very easy to deal with. And finally, I mean, board wipes just deal with this creature and everything that has hexproof. So overall, this feels like an incredibly clunky creature. It feels like in your aggro deck, you're playing a 3/4 utility creature for 4 mana is a very bad idea. So I would cut this. Toski is great. Flame Rush Rider is great. Notice this again. Let's talk about the dragon one more time. Dash. Notice that this card has very similar text. For 4 mana, you dash it and it returns to your hand at the end of turn. However, look at the difference. Look at the difference in abilities between just hitting in the face for 4 damage, that's all it does, or something that creates a copy, attacking, giving it haste, and immediately, well, it doesn't need the haste actually, that it's attacking and immediately getting another ETB or getting that double strike from your commander. Much, much better, with the option that you can just cast this for 5 and leave it around, especially if a haste enabler. You can kind of just leave this out and eventually like not have to spend the 4 mana turn after turn. This is just infinitely superior. Froghemoth. Do I like this? I don't think I do. What is this card for? This is a card that grows after it initially... Okay, so the idea here is that when this hits, you exile cards from your opponent's... You exile cards from the defending player's graveyard equal to the power of this creature or how hard it hit, and then it grows. The entire purpose of this card is that it grows hit by hit, and that's really, really good with our commander, because if you've ever had a creature grow through combat damage with double strike, you know how insanely powerful that is. This hits for 4, let's highball it and say you gain 4 more, you exile 4 creatures, it becomes an 8, and then it hits again. Really, really impressive. But not really is the problem, right? You paid 5 mana, you need your commander out, you attack with this, your opponent, like the highball where your opponent has 4, doesn't block this, it does full damage, your opponent has 4 creatures in the graveyard, make this into an 8, all of this to hit for a total of 12 damage. I'm really not impressed by it. I think also it gets a lot worse when you have to play this out early or you play this out with your commander not on the battlefield. And yeah, this thing grows, but just not in a way that your commander particularly cares about, nor, does it do anything impressive. The only thing I really like about it is this line of text that says Trample Haste. And in fact, Any creature with Trample Haste is just really good in this deck. So by that nature, I wouldn't say you have to cut this, but I'm really, really unimpressed by it. 5 mana is so much. So much for a 4/4 Trample Haste. I think the bar is much better now. I think we can get like 5/5s and 6s for that with other abilities. So this just doesn't feel good enough. Glorybringer is close. Glorybringer is very, very close with, for me. This is somewhat of a melange or a mix of both Impetuous Devils and Archwing Dragon. And is that mix good enough? I'd argue no. Some would argue yes. The ability for this to come out, exert, destroy, to take out a non-dragon commander is pretty good. You get that, you know, the exertion doesn't matter as much when you lead on your commander because your commander only gives that extra damage on that first attack, so it being exerted is not a big problem. And then every second turn you get to deal 4 damage to a creature. It's not terrible. I'm not impressed by it, but if you kept it in, I wouldn't think it's too bad. Ilharg is great. Once again, very powerful card. Love it. Kiki Jiki is fundamentally powerful in this deck and is just like one of the cornerstones. Wouldn't take that out. Orhan Frostfang, I also really, really like. See, this is a giving Death Touch card that I like a lot more, with an immediate ability that all your creatures get Death Touch regardless of vigilance or otherwise, and then when they deal combat damage you draw a card. This is perfect. I like this very, very much. Obviously with Double Strike it gets a lot better. Your creatures having Double Strike, or even it having Haste and Double Strike, is much better, but it's just a solid card. Scion of Calamity. We're coming to the end of the creatures. This one I'm unsure about. I get the ceiling of this card, but the floor of it doesn't particularly impress me. If we had more haste enablers, I would like it a lot more. The idea is when you hit something, hit a player, you get to destroy target enchantment that player controls. My problem is how often do you hit with this? 1, you have to wait a whole turn cycle without a haste enabler. 2, it has no evasion. And 3, like, yeah, no, that's it. It has no evasion. I think that's honestly the problem here. You attack me with this, and I have like Rhystic Study, I have Smothering Tide, I have Esper Sentinel, anything like that. I'll just throw a creature in the way. Heck, if I have only Esper Sentinel, I'll throw the Esper Sentinel in the way, because not only is it would have been destroyed anyways, I am preventing 10 damage. Now, that's with the Double Strike mainly, and something to note is with the Double Strike, the ceiling is really, really high, so you get to destroy 2 enchantments. But notably, the original version of this never gets the Double Strike without haste, and the Myriad versions only target 2 other opponents. And so you need a very specific situation to make the most of this, where all but one of your opponents have 2 artifacts and or enchantments, and then you get to destroy them both. And after that, these are just it just attacks for 5/5 double strike every turn. I don't know. I'm not impressed. If you put in some more trample and you put in some more haste enablers, this is a fantastic card. This is a card that's good, that's being held back by the current build of the deck. And don't get me wrong, I do see those. You know, we have Rhythm of the Wild here. I think we could have, there we go, Gimli's Reckless Might. If we had like Concordant Crossroads, but I don't really, in the meta, so I was going to suggest the 1 mana haste enablers in red and green that I like to, but from what you said in your meta, that's going to be used against you a lot more, so I think I would just rather like Lightning Greaves or things like that, but that doesn't change the evasion problem. I want to be specific before going any further. Once again, these are suggestions for the power level of the deck builder. The deck builder is requesting. Sign of Calamity, I think, is perfectly serviceable, and in fact, very, very strong in mid-level power level. But if you want to push further than that, this is just kind of okay, and your opponents are going to be, you know, fighting against it with board clears or counter spells, or neatly destroying your commander before this thing attacks, or tapping it down. Like your opponents will interact a lot more. Remember when I said at the beginning that if you started the game with all your permanents have hexproof and indestructible, everything's power level goes up? Sign of Calamity is just like that. In fact, if you give it evasion for free, it'd get even better, but as it doesn't have evasion, as it doesn't have that's, you know, indestructible or hexproof, it's just fine. And if we want to get to a high power level, cards that are just fine often need to be cut. I'll leave this up to them because I'm not 100% against keeping it. I think we can do better. Stampede Surfer, this one is just a little too cute. Haste 4/4 that creates 2 green boar creature tokens. For each opponent. Okay, good. I thought it was going to be just the opponent attacks. But even then, you are adding a total of 3 2/2s to the battle. And with your commander out, once again, the big asterisks, they're 4/2s technically, or they're 2/2 double strikes. I don't think that's good enough. I like this card good. Like, I think this one's fine, but it's really, really close to not being good enough. The haste on it is really nice, but this is the kind of creature I like to cheat into play anyways. But you can't cheat into play attacking because I think that's going to be the final thing. So I think this gets really good with things like Kiki Jiki and other abilities, But cards like Calamity that don't actually force the attack, they just create the attack happening. If you're familiar with what I mean, Ilharg's like this too. Like, the creatures come in attacking, then the Stampede Surfer actually doesn't do anything. It needs to attack to get the trigger. So you're just attacking with a 4/4 double strike if you have your commander out, which is good, but like not good enough. So though I really like it, once again, at this power level, I think it's kind of showing its weaknesses, though I like this a lot better than cards like Scion of Calamity. I think this is much more straightforwardly strong, and works really, really well with cards like Toski, cards like, Orhan Frostfang. So I do like that aspect of it. Calamity is a fantastic card. I pulled it at pre-release, at a 2-headed giant pre-release, and it was fantastic. It's a very, very good card. I think this card is very, very good here. It is notably non-legendary, so there's a few things it doesn't hit, but as a whole, I think it's very, very impressive. Kogla and Yardo are very, very good. Absolutely love that. I love this text line here. It gains trample and haste until end of turn. Even if you fight sometimes, I think it's fantastic. And the ability to discard it, as people know, is just good. Mirage Fanlax is okay. I need to play with this card a little bit. I do think it's good. I need to see it. I think it is good, but it's not a card that I've seen enough that I've seen it in lists recently, and I've seen it suggested a lot more. So I think the community is like kind of turning to it, but I need to see its power. It looks really good. I'm just unsure, but at this moment, I'll say keep it in for sure. And finally, our last card is Ravager Worm. I genuinely do not understand why this card is here, if not for the Riot. This is a creature that fights on ETB and comes in as a 4/5 with haste. That's really it. You can destroy lands here or there, but like this won't destroy some very key lands that you need destroyed, such as Cabal Coffer, such as Glacial Chasm, things like that. So this feels incredibly clunky and bad for a deck that otherwise has so many more powerful creatures. All right, with that, I'm almost at 30 minutes on just these creatures. So I want to end the looking at the deck before additions here, as you can kind of see the themes I'm going towards, and let's see if I can answer some of the questions or ideas that I posed with better cards. So, just at the forefront, card that I always need to suggest when it's not in here is Lightning Bolt. Some of your opponent's commanders will be killed by Lightning Bolt. You need to pack this card. This is how you interact with your opponents on the first few turns. And like the situation I gave about Beast Whisperer, where an opponent has used their entire turn to cast that, just as how Lightning Bolt could be used against you, you could use Lightning Bolt against them. So having this card around is essential, I would say, in any red deck, but especially in red-green decks. Rite of the Raging Storm is another one I do want to momentarily bring up. This was a card that I believe is in your sideboard, you were considering it, and I want to encourage that idea. Rite of the Raging Storm is a very, very impressive card that spreads around 15 damage before you even get control of it. Control of a Lightning Rager yourself. That's incredibly impressive to me. I really, really do like that. Unlike a lot of the other cards, this works over and over again with your commander because it is a new creature being summoned every single time. It is a fine thing to ramp into. Drop this at 5 and watch your opponents attack each other for a few turns. And it's just the amount of damage this will spread around and how well it works with your commander, I think will be very, very much so worthwhile. This is, you know what? I didn't say this. I didn't add this. If I can spell ignition. Wow, don't look at that. That's terribly spelled. Chandra's Ignition just kind of caught my eyes. We don't have a lot of ways to deal non-combat damage, and I think I'd like to suggest this because you do have a lot of very strong creatures. The Double Strike doesn't work with this, but with your bigger beats, I wouldn't mind just a few other ways to kind of deal non-combat damage. No big deal. I just want to throw it out there. Let's keep going. Ogre Battle Driver is a lot more of what I would look for in a 4-drop in this deck. This empowers all your other creatures with both Haste and +2/+0. With Double Strike, that becomes +4 in total damage to a player, which is nice, but it's the Haste enabling that I really, really like. I also like that if you make copies of creatures, Ogre Battle Driver will still give them the +2/+0, even though they tend to either be attacking or have Haste, and I think that makes it a lot more impressive. For example, this card with the Stampede Surfer makes a much stronger combination of attacking with 4/2 boars, who then can have Double Strike after the fact, making them incredibly impressive. And this is just a static ability that applies for the rest of the game. So Ogre Battle Driver feels much, much stronger. It also does something, helps you use those mana dorks late in game, both to play them and maybe tap for mana, though that doesn't make much sense, or to make them into basically 3/1s that attack immediately, which I like a lot more. Remember, those 3/1s with your commander are 3/1s Double Strike, and that's a lot better. Jaxus is here because I like Jaxus. I love this card. Is that enough? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's good enough, but this is a card. This is a deck with Blitz themes, and Jaxus is here to give Blitz. Are they the best card at 4 mana? I'm going to say no. I'm often a little disappointed by this card, but at the same time, I think it's really, really cool, and the utility of it is incredibly high. I do like that it turns every creature into like a cycling card, and especially like with cards like the Arclight, the Arch Dragon, I forget what it's called now. Jaxus would really solve the problem of its existence by constantly making a second copy of it. When it becomes 5 mana for 2 4/4s with Double Strike, it gets a lot better. So Jaxus kind of is a nice little glue that improves a lot of your creatures. That's not even including things like how they interact with the previous card or Orhan Frostfang to dramatically increase the number of cards you draw. Just overall, I think a very, very good card. The sorcery speed ability is a bit rough. The fact that you can blitz this card as well is a bit strange because you tend not to want to do that, but overall, a particularly fun and cool card that I would be amiss not to suggest. Speaking of things that it's hard not to suggest, Helm of the Host. I think this card really, really speaks for itself. It's just a much more powerful version of almost any form of Kiki-Jiki effect, albeit for a much higher cost and much more telegraphed. So something that's worth considering and something that works very well with both your commander and a number of other creatures. Though, that being said, it doesn't work with your commander in the sense that your commander's triggers don't stack and might be better off attaching to something else. Loyal Apprentice. So this is the one very low mana creature that I wanted to suggest, but it is an insanely powerful one. Loyal Apprentice is a card that I think is generally slept on and not taken seriously. In decks that want additional damage, Loyal Apprentice is very much there for you and will just generate a little more damage here and then. Now, a 1/1 Double Strike doesn't feel that impactful, but the flying is the thing that's important. Both getting this trigger repeatedly is really nice, as long as your commander's out, but also, honestly, the 1/1 Double Strike doesn't get blocked often and will just, kind of scratch at your opponents over and over. Granted, they lose Double Strike after the first one, but you don't mind because you're still swinging in with them, and they're very, very impressive that way. But the main other reason I want to say Loyal Apprentice is because it's going to be one of our combo cards that I think you should absolutely be running, which is Breath of Fury. Breath of Fury with Loyal Apprentice and no flying anything that can block flying on your opponent's side is an infinite combat combo, which will defeat all your opponents very, very easily. But otherwise, Breath of Fury is still very, very strong because it enables you to use this card to get additional combats. With those additional combats, you will make more copies, more clones, more creatures with double strike, and the creatures that were hasted in already do not lose the double strike and will continue to deal pretty good damage as long as they keep getting in. So Breath of Fury really catches my eye. On the other hand is Portraiser, which I'm having a harder time suggesting without a few more haste enablers. If you can give Portraiser haste, then this gets really, really good. Now, something that I think a lot of players don't think about with Portraiser is the way this card works is it's meant to stop you from being able to cheese multiple attack steps by attacking the same player over and over again. It's made to stop you from using Breath of the Fury style combos, but it's actually not good at that in this deck. And by that I mean it's incredibly good at winning the game. You have two ways actually that you get around this cost, and I'm going to actually suggest this being the strongest card you could add, especially at 60 cents. The way one is that when you Kiki Jiki this creature, or if you have something like Calamity, the copies that are made are different entities. So you can use copies to attack opponents that previous copies have attacked. With that in mind, if you have the ability to be constantly making copies at every combat step, you are able to keep attacking whoever you got that first attack in, assuming Portraiser goes through and can also go through again, and you'll be inundated with combat steps after. But the even sneakier thing about this is if you can give it haste and you have your commander out, Portraiser deals combat damage to get you another combat phase, and it does this without doing another attack on that opponent, which means it hits twice with double strike, you get 2 additional combats, and then you swing it at other opponents, hopefully getting more and more additional combats. It can't attack the same player twice, but it can hit that player twice when it attacks, which is really, really good. So I honestly think this is the strongest addition that you can have, and if you can give it haste and attack in, you will win games on the spot. Speaking of winning games on the spot, and I believe this is my final addition to the deck, it is Hyrax Tower Scout. There are other cards that do something like this, but I think this is the best one to grab. Hyrax Tower Scout enters the battlefield, untaps target creature. Obviously, this is a Kiki Jiki combo. When you have both of them out, you make a copy of the Centaur untaps Kiki Jiki, and you repeat infinitely until you have infinite creatures and you defeat all your opponents. Now, not everyone likes what I would call infinite combats or infinite combos, but you know what? If you need that power level, this is the kind of card that will give you that power level. As a creature, both halves of this can be pulled with Worldly Tutor, and if you wanted to put more tutors in here, you would have a pretty good chance of getting it. But I think that would be the final thing to increase the power of your deck. With that in mind, that is the end of my additions. This deck is really, really cool. I hope these additions make sense, and I was kind of hard on a lot of the higher mana cards, but I think when you're trying to push power level, that's something that happens. I would be really interested in seeing another draft of this deck, especially so we can come back and start talking at the 1 and 2 mana level and see how much else we can improve it. How much else? Yeah. I think this deck can have a very high ceiling, and I'm really interested in the direction we're going in. All right, thank you so much for sending me the deck. Good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.